It's just perfect. So welcome everybody to this evening's talk, The Gardens at the Natural History Museum. Our speaker this evening is Tom McCarter. He studied at Queen Mary College London and then at Kew, where he subsequently worked as a horticulturalist and then as community horticultural learning coordinator. He became wildlife garden manager at the Natural History Museum 6 years ago, and then took on the role of head of the NHM Gardens for its transformation, which is incredible. I don't know how many of you have visited, but hopefully, if you haven't been already, this talk will inspire you to go and have a look. So we're really delighted that he's agreed to speak to us about the garden this evening. So I'm going to pass now over to you, Tom.
Fantastic. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I'm very sorry about the technical issues. I was a bit slow getting in, and yeah, various laptop issues and sharing screen issues, but it's all been resolved. So I'm going to jump straight in. Yeah, so my name's Tom. I'm head of gardens at the NHM, Natural History Museum, and we've just come through well, I started in 2019 at the museum, and there was a big project called the Urban Nature Project that was just kicking off around then. So from 2020, we got planning permission, and then obviously COVID happened. We had some delays within about 1.5 years, 2 years of construction, and we opened in July last year. So it's been a really fantastic project, and there's lots to talk about. Now, when I was pulling up my slides for this, as it's the London Natural History Society, I've got a presentation that focuses on some of the biodiversity recording and monitoring that happens on the site. And unfortunately, it doesn't have some of my slides of the history. So I meant to drop those in, but don't. So I'm just going to touch quickly on the history of the site, talk a little bit about what has the process that we've been through to come to where we are today. And then I'm going to walk you through the gardens in kind of chronological sequence. And then I'm going to talk about some of the biodiversity recording and monitoring that we do on the site and some of the science. So I won't jump off the slide because in this slide, we are looking at the Alfred Waterhouse designed building of the Natural History Museum, which opened in 1881. Waterhouse designed it as a cathedral to nature, which is sort of a kind of Victorian Romanesque building with lots of fantastic. You have really, I'm sure lots of you know the Natural History Museum very carefully, but you know, when you get here next time, do have a look at the building itself. It's just amazing. And if you look up close, there are lots of different motifs in the terracotta of both extinct and extant or alive creatures. So as originally designed, the eastern wing looked at the history of life on Earth, and so it contained extinct things. So we have fossil fish and pterosaurs and all sorts of other motifs built into the terracotta. And the western wing is all alive things. So starfish, spiders, birds. It's a really beautiful building. They did get some things wrong. So actually in the eastern wing, there is a fossil fish, a coelacanth, which is discovered alive off the coast of South Africa, I believe in the 80s. So that's one. And then in the western wing, there's a representation of passenger pigeons, which were alive when the building was built, but became extinct quite quickly after that, actually, I believe by the early 1900s. This is why we essentially have laid the gardens out as we have. So we've got the history of life on Earth in the Eastern Gardens and a garden called the Evolution Gardens. And we step through into the Western Gardens, which are called the Nature Discovery Garden. And then you can go around the corner to the Darwin Courtyard, which looks to the future and the impacts of climate change. So you've got a narrative throughout the whole gardens of change through time. Yeah, so that's a potted history of the gardens. I should have said, before the NHM was built, there was on the site, there was, if you go far enough back, it would have been market gardens supplying kind of London. Then there was Albertopolis, so around the time of the same time as the V&A and the Imperial College and Hyde Park were all built. So there was a RHS garden just slightly to the north of the site. And then during the wars, there was Dig for Victory garden, or allotment gardens behind more or less where the Paleo building is sitting now. And all sorts of things have happened in the gardens. So there's been whale carcasses that have been buried and deboned. So it's fascinating history. Something I do find quite interesting from the history is that right after the building was built, they had grand plans to do the gardens. And actually the superintendent of Hyde Park actually did a design for the gardens, which was very formal, had, fountains and circular beds very of the time. But they ran out of money to do it. And so they didn't do it. And they did the railings, the grade 1 listed railings that go around the building, around on road level. But by the 1890s, actually, there's an ordnance survey map that shows that the West Gardens had already started turning into kind of shrubberies with meandering paths, which I personally find quite interesting because it takes on more or less the same form as the Wildlife Garden did, and now the Nature Discovery Garden. So there has been, so there's been gardens on the site for a very long time, and this is just the latest iteration. But it's so brilliant to have been part of a project that has really kind of brought the museum's vision and the story outside, because it's been something that's been talked about for a very long time, and we just haven't made it happen. So, anything else to say on the history? I don't think so. I'm going to skip on now. So right in this picture, we are looking at the Waterhouse building through the Carboniferous coal forest. I'm just wondering if I've got a slide here which gives you a sense. Obviously, I do a lot of these tours in the garden, and it's so great to be able to get up close to things. So if you haven't visited, then by all means do come, because it's intended to be a very immersive garden. It's interesting that, we really wanted to take people back in time and make visitors feel like they were in the landscape. So similar to in the Nature Discovery Garden in the West, we want people to feel like they're in a habitat, or in the British countryside in the middle of London. And the same goes in the Evolution Garden. So we're trying to get a feel of what it might have been like. Now, obviously, that's very difficult to do. So in the coal forest, in the Carboniferous period, we don't have any plants alive today that we can use that were around then. So we would have had things like seed ferns or giant lycophytes, giant things that we don't have today. We have relatives of them. We have things like Selaginellas and Equisetums, but we don't have the actual plants. So that's why in this section we've used tree ferns, or Dicksonia, soft tree ferns from Australia, Dicksonia antarctica. And they we have used the understory planting as things like Usmunda regalis, which is a native fern, but Usmundaceae are some of the earlier evolving ferns. So although they weren't around in the Carboniferous period, we've still tried to link in earlier ferns where we can. And there's some Selaginellas and other bits in there as well. So this story tells this garden tells the story of when the Earth's coal deposits a lot of the Earth's coal deposits were laid down. The climate was warmer, it was wet, and there was kind of the first extensive rainforest that over many millennia then became coal and oil and fossil fuels that we use today. So climate change is a big factor and theme throughout the whole gardens, and we've tried to represent. You step over that gardens, and there's these, you can just see in the, probably can't see my cursor, but this red rock here, there's a line of scoria before you get into the Jurassic. And that there represents the end Permian extinction event, which we think was volcanic in origin. And that's one of the only 2 rocks in the gardens that are not from the UK. So there are 26 different pieces of geology or different types of stone that are used in the gardens. And 2 of them are from Iceland, because we can get a source of them, and obviously we don't have red scoria in the. So we haven't been able to represent all of the different time zones in this garden. So the garden starts at 500 million years ago. Earth's history is 4 billion, but we do go a bit further back than that. The oldest rock in the garden is there is some Lewisian gneiss, and there's a big boulder just as you come in and go down the entrance ramp from Exhibition Road. So look to your right and you'll see a massive boulder. That's the oldest rock in the garden, about 2.6, I believe, billion years old. We have some other very old zones. A lot of these were collected from the Outer Hebrides in Scotland. I think there's green anthracite. There's I'm not a geologist by background, so some of them are lost on me. But there is a good web page on the NHM website if you're interested in some of the geology in the gardens. And then the gardens proper starts at the Cambrian explosion, which is represented with some lovely brass inlays of some of the creatures that were in the seas then. Life began in the seas and kind of exploded at that point with some Welsh feather slate. So I do recommend when you do visit the garden, if you go down and come in the tube tunnel entrance, so if you go through the South Kensington tube station, walk through the tunnel, and then you come out of the cavern of geology, looking up at the Waterhouse, and it's quite a sight. I should say step-free access. So there was lots of considerations on why we wanted to do this project. One of them was improving visitor flow and accessibility into the site. So we now have step-free access from the tube tunnel all the way up through the gardens and into the main entrance hall, which is really important. So visitors can visit. Yes, so going back to the different garden themes, so you've got these quite distinct areas. So we go from the wet coal forest into the Jurassic period, which is where we've got this lovely bronze cast of Dippy. I'm sure many of you would be familiar with Dippy, the Diplodocus skeleton that was in the Waterhouse building's central hall for many, many years, and then has gone on tour and been very popular around the UK. So this is a bronze cast of Dippy called Fern. So it was named by some local school children. It was called Fern the dinosaur. And it's actually a more accurate cast of Dippy. Dippy is a cast of a skeleton of a Diplodocus carnegii from the Morrison Formation, which I believe is in Utah in the States. I might be wrong on the state, but it's from the States. We know from the geology of the area that the climate at that time, we think that the climate at that time would have been more Mediterranean, so drier summers and wetter winters. And so it would have been a drier climate at that time. So we've got some lovely sandstone blocks, which also kind of tell the story of Earth's climate getting drier. So we've chosen that distinctly, one from a thematic view to kind of represent these different areas of the garden, and also from a kind of an aesthetic view and a juxtaposition if you've got these two very different types of garden there. From a planting perspective, we can start to be a little bit more accurate in the plants that we use. So you'll see just under Fern's head there, you've got some Pinus mugo. There are, on the left-hand side of that image, there are some dwarfed Metasequoia glyptostroboides. So that's a conifer that's a living fossil. Just outside the frame on the right, there are some Willemi, so Willemi nobilis, which is another living fossil. Plants that are known from the fossil record before they were rediscovered. So we've got lots of interesting stories, and we're starting to bring in conifers and gymnosperms, cycads, with an understory of ferns like Asplenium Blectum pinamarina. It's now changed its name. It's Ostroblectum pinamarina. And there's Dudia media. There's some other things in there as well. So, yeah, just going back to Fern the dinosaur, because it's quite remarkable. It's more accurate, as I said. So they switched the vertebra in Dippy was actually that mounted it the wrong way up, the first vertebra behind the skull. So it's now been corrected. And also Dippy was quite flat-soled apparently. And so Paul Barrett, one of the museum scientists, said that actually we now know that they would have walked a bit on tiptoes on their front feet and that allowed them to kind of go up. So we've corrected some of the inaccuracies of Dippy, and we now have probably the most complete or accurate Diplodocus skeleton, and it is really remarkable. What's interesting from it is bronze or brass, so it is exceedingly heavy, and I think we put out for tender, and a lot of I think quite a lot of firms said that it just wouldn't be possible to do from an engineering perspective because of the weights, and two said they could. It was cast in Madrid by a foundry in Madrid, and interestingly, some of the solutions that they came to make the skeleton lighter is the same as nature. So they made the bones hollow, which is I find fascinating, but it's cable tensioned, and if you come out on a windy day, you can actually see the tail moving. So engineers get quite excited about it. We've had the engineering club come and do an event looking at just the skeleton. So just gonna scoot on. Well, I'm actually going to go back because I don't have photos of these areas, but I do recommend that you come back and investigate and have a read of the wonderful interpretation. We've got lots of beautiful stories that you can delve into, lots of tactiles that you can touch. So, representations of one of the earliest mammals, a little shrew-like creature which is about that big on the rocks. There's real fossils that children can see and can touch. We've got giant ammonites that were preserved by conserved by the conservatives at the museum. Some wonderful pieces of petrified wood. So there's many different aspects that you could spend time and enjoy. We've used the geology and the benching as well. So Paul Kendrick, who's one of was the lead scientist on this side of the gardens. He's a paleobotanist. He was asked what his favorite stone in the gardens was, and it's just past this Fern the dinosaur. There's some chalk benches, and chalk is quite hard apparently to make benches from because obviously it's quite soft in places. So they've got a special type of chalk that's been condensed under another type of stone. So it's quite hard, but it's got lumps of silica. So they had to be very careful cutting it. So I think the stonemasons who worked on this project had some challenges, I should say. But moving up onto the back of where you can see Fern there, you come into the Cretaceous and the evolution of flowering plants. So there's some stories. We've got plants like Elysium. There's plants like ephedra in there, which is a gymnosperm, but some of them are insect pollinated, I believe. So you've got and cycads in there, which are some of the earliest insect pollinated plants. So we've got themes around pollination. My favorite garden is, if you were to follow up this main path, just on the left-hand side of all these people, there's a small alcove of a garden that you can go into. And I'd say it's probably the area of the garden that, in my opinion, probably needs the most work. So that's why I don't have a photo of it. It's not maybe looking its best, but I do recommend coming back in years to come because it's a fascinating concept. It's called Tropical London. It represents the Eocene period, which is around 40 to 50 million years ago, when Great Britain and the UK was more or less in the same location, a little bit different, I believe, a little bit further south, but not huge. But the climate at that point was tropical or subtropical, at least. And one of the ways that we know that is because of the fossil seeds and fruits and plants that have been identified from that era. And under London, there's a deposit of clay called the London clay. A lot of the tube tunnels, Paul was saying this, a lot of the tube tunnels go through the London clay because it's a very good tunneling substrate. But contained in the London clay, there are lots of fossil seeds and fruits. And you've got to go to places like the Isle of Sheppey in Kent where they wash out onto the beach. another interesting fact about the London clay, they're all iron pyrite fossils, so they degrade in oxygen, they need to be preserved in little jars full of, I think it's a mineral or some substance that keeps the oxygen out. But utterly fascinating. So they've been collected by the Victorians, and in the early 20th century, there were two women, two paleobotanists at the museum who put together a monograph of all the plants and identified it. And I find it absolutely fascinating because if you have a look at some of the images of these things, they're tiny fragments of fossils, and from that they were able to kind of work out what they're related to. Now we think it would have been a coastal forest, and we know that because there's one of the species is nipper palm, which is commonly found. It's mangrove palm. It's currently found in Southeast Asia, and other kind of riverine species. And so the fossils would have been filled from infill from sediment and then compressed. And so you can, if you think of an orange, you can have a fossil of the outside of the skin of the orange. You can have the infill of the inside, or you could have each of the segments or the inside kind of little fossils of each of the segments themselves or of the seed. And it just blows my mind that someone was able to take these tiny fragments and then work out what it's related to today. As a horticulturalist, I find it really interesting because it's an odd mix of temperate species, but also so there's things like vitis or vitaceae. So there's things like grapevine or Parthenocissus. So they're normally a temperate origin plants. Some of the conifers are temperate in origin as well. Pines, Pinaceae. But a lot of things that are now found in Southeast Asia. So magnolias, and we've tried to represent that planting in that garden. So it's going to be plants that are related to the flora of the London clay, but we have to find ones that are hardy enough to represent. So we have things like, there is currently out there things like symphytum or comfrey from the Boraginaceae, but it wouldn't have been a herbaceous Boraginaceae. It probably would have been something like Aretia, which is a tree. So there are some hardy, some tree-like and tree and shrubs. So it's a challenge for the future going forward to kind of turn that into a tropical garden. But that's one that we kind of enjoy. So I just find the concept really fascinating. So I'm going to skip on now. We're going to leave the evolution gardens and we're going to go into the nature discovery garden. So we're looking down here on the right-hand side from the ramp, looking down at two new habitats and the old wildlife garden. Now, I'm sure some of you have visited the wildlife garden. For those of you who don't know, it was started in 1995 as a living laboratory, but also an outdoor collection space for the museum. So it was representations of different British habitats that you might find in the south of the UK. So, for example, there were chalk grasslands, and they imported a hill of chalk. And so we have a chalk grassland in the middle of central London where it's not normally found. And it was laid out on the NVC classification, so National Vegetation Classification Scheme, different types of oak, birch, woodland. There were meant to be different types of ponds as well. There was heathland. So really amazing garden. And it was very well loved. It's been very well studied. I'll come on to that in a second. But it did have some challenges. I think it was quite difficult to maintain very distinct habitat types in very small parcels. So, for example, some of the woodland is also, yes, it is oak birch woodland. It was planted in 1995, but you're also disregarding probably the largest trees on site, which are the magnificent London plane trees, which have a huge ecological kind of factor. So in my sense, we've stepped away from MVC and trying to keep things as a distinct category, but we now think of it as urban woodland or urban grassland. And what we're trying to represent here is that plants that grow in an urban setting, it's almost a native botanic garden, you might think of it. We're growing where it is a garden, but we're trying to use traditional management techniques and habitat management techniques to maintain habitats. So it's an interesting balance between almost being a nature reserve, but also being a garden. And you've got aspects that are planted. Yeah. So the three main habitat types we've got are kind of the woodlands, grasslands, and the aquatic systems and the ponds. So you can see the grasslands, and the previous wildlife garden finished more or less where in the right hand photo you can looking down. There's a semicircular lawn essentially, and the wildlife garden finished there. It was about an acre inside. So we've opened it up and we've brought it all the way out onto the west lawn. Again, going back to access, we've opened the gate onto Queensgate, so you now can get to Gloucester Road Tube Station out that way as well. This entrance is much quieter, so I recommend if you're coming to the museum, you go this way. And yeah, so it's really, we've changed the name as well. It's now known as the Nature Discovery Garden. I personally prefer that. Wildlife Garden, to me, makes it sound like if you're a visitor, you have to have a special type of garden to have wildlife in it. And that's not true. Even the smaller spaces can have value to biodiversity, and that's something we want to show here. And the grasslands are actually a good example of that. So we've got these hills. It's hard to make out in this photo on the right hand side, but there are two hills, and that's used Site 1 topsoil to build up these hills. And the soils at the museum are quite nutrient rich. They're quite high in phosphorus. They're also quite alkaline. So about 8 or 9, but it depends where you are. It's had a lot of construction on it, so there's some odd soil across the site. But it's not really the ideal soil for creating a wildflower meadow. Now, if you look at books, you're often, or even designers will recommend that if you want to put in a wildflower meadow, then you need to kind of strip out your topsoil and put a low nutrient topsoil in. That's not something we wanted to do from a sustainability point of view. But we wanted to demonstrate that you can grow or have meadows of value to biodiversity using nutrient-rich soil. So we did have a big flush of ruderal weeds, things like sonchus, but on the recommendation of Kew, Wakehurst Place, in there, we sowed a grass-only mix, and we're slowly adding in herb diversity. So we've now got meadow grasses, things like cocksfoot or timothy, some of the smaller timothy. So we've got some of those meadow grasses that you might find. And actually, the herb diversity is starting to come in naturally. We've got things like knapweed and oxeye daisies. Those kind of can be quite thuggish, but they're nice meadow plants, and they show. So we're trying to use this as a case study of what you can do in an urban environment. It's currently full of cinnabar moths. Actually, I think all the ragwort's been exterminated this year. We've got so many cinnabars that I haven't seen all the ragworts are just getting decimated. Just gonna, yep. And then so skipping, I'll come back to the ponds in a second, but skipping back through, we go all the way through, and this is the section that it's the Darwin Centre Courtyard. And this photo on the left-hand side, kind of the right-hand side of the courtyard, is looking to the future and the impacts of climate change. So we have plants mainly from the Mediterranean. There's a couple of Asian species that are commonly found in the Mediterranean, things like Boris alba, they're common street trees. But we also have cork oaks, figs, and Mediterranean flora. And that's really completing that narrative of change through time, and to try and get our visitors to understand that the climate continues to change. London is, various predictions say different things, but could have a climate similar to Barcelona by 2050. So this section of the garden is called London 2050. On the left-hand side, just slightly out of that shot, there is this kind of it's called the suburban edge. It's more allotment gardens and edibles. That's kind of looking at the urban environment and kind of that edge between city and countryside. We have these lovely planters that you can't currently access because that area is closed off, but they were designed by a community group in North Kensington. And it was plants that meant something to them. So it's trying to get that human connection into our garden, and they designed this plant palette, plants that had meant something to them. So I think the sunflowers were one of our participants was from Sweden. There's some veg in there. There's other things. There was a lot of Caribbean herbs as well, things like Chenon Benny, which we were able to grow and plant out. There's some fantastic stories. We got donated some aloe that came over with one of the participants' grandfather from Jamaica during the Windrush generation. So there's some lovely stories that were brought out there. Yes, just keeping an eye on time. Now, I wanted to talk about the translocation. That's why I kind of skipped over the pond section. I thought you'd be interested in this side of things. So we wanted to do protect the biodiversity that was in the wildlife garden as much as possible, and that includes the biodiversity of the ponds. And to do that, we had these wonderful ponds, but they were fantastic and they were very rich, but they did have some issues. The liner was coming up on about, well, it would be 30 years old this year, so it was getting towards the end of its lifespan. The margins were very dominated by common reed, as often happens in ponds, and also there was a lot of water lily. So we had some very thuggish plants that were difficult to manage. And so it was due for a refresh. And we've another issue with it is we're now schools facilitators were trying to do pond dipping. There was not really any access. There was a small jetty, which was kind of very rickety. It was quite difficult to do. So we took the opportunity to build these new ponds. And I'll just quickly maybe jump back 2 slides to show you. We've got the sunken pathway that goes through with a jetty, and now you can get a full school group down and do pond dipping off the sides of the pond, which is really special. But we did want to protect the biodiversity that was in there, so we did something that was quite unusual. I think on construction projects, if a developer has a pond, say with great crested newts, they probably wouldn't touch it with great crested newts, but what they might do if they wanted to do a translocation is build a new pond and then pump everything over to the new pond and then build on the site. Now we couldn't do that because of space, so we had to essentially build temporary ponds, pump everything out, build the new ponds, and pump everything back in, which is not been done before as far as I'm aware. Correct me if I'm wrong, probably not on this scale. And we did it over the winter. That's because the amphibians leave the ponds in the winter, they hibernate, and we wanted to get the ponds built again by their breeding season, essentially. So we were aiming to have them completed by, I think it was March. In reality, trying to pour concrete over the winter is difficult. So we got the smaller pond completed, I think it was by the end of March, which was good. It's still quite late for newts. They're often, if it's good weather, they can be on the move in February. But we did get it done, and it didn't have any impact on it. They had a very successful year breeding, which is good. The other pond, I think, was done by May, so a little bit late. I might have been earlier than that. I'll stand corrected. But going on to kind of the process, so we pumped it all out, collect all of the water, some of the sediment, pretty much all of the sediment, and some of the plants. And it was definitely, so our museum scientists took DNA samples, took water chemistry samples throughout the whole time. That's still being written up, so I can't comment on the kind of the quantitative data side of the success. But from an anecdotal, it was definitely successful. So that year, I have never seen so many Fs or juvenile baby newts as I did, and that might have been because there was a reduction in plant cover, so it was easier to see them. But you would look in, a square 30 centimeters, and you might see 10 Fs, and if you take that over the whole pond, there would have been thousands in there. So very successful. And we still have very healthy populations of frogs, toads, and common newts as well, smooth newts, in both ponds, actually. Other things that definitely made it through, we have things like emperor dragonflies in the first year. Now, some odonata larvae can take a few years to mature, so there's a good chance that some of those were nymphs that we hand netted and then translocated, and we did that for as many as we could find. So we're still doing odonata surveys this year, but we've definitely had some we've had broad-bodied chasers, we've seen emperors, both common and common blues and azures, I believe. I saw reds. So there were about 15 or 16 different species of Odonata recorded in the gardens, in the wildlife garden, and it's been great to see them all back. So that's very interesting. Actually, just yesterday, I sent a photo of a fly to one of the museum curators, and he came back and said it survives in pond margins, and there's a good chance that came through on either plant material or in the sediment that was pumped back into the ponds. So yeah, it's a very, very successful. Yes. Sorry, I'm going to speed through a bit. I can see the time. It's coming up on 7:45. So, well, we're in its 30th year this year, and I thought I'd touch on some of the other aspects of the garden. So, we are very from the concept of the from the wildlife garden, but even going further back, we have herbarium records of plants that were found during the Great Exhibition of 1862, also from the construction, around the construction. I think ruderal weeds mostly, but there's some interesting records. So museum scientists have been recording wildlife in the gardens for a very long time. By far, the most records were collected after 1995. Mostly ad hoc recording, although there is some kind of structured surveys that have been going for a long time. So moth trapping's been going on quite a long time. And vegetation surveys have also been going a very long time. Excuse me. So in 29 species, coming up on 30 years of species recording, there's around 56,000 species records, 3,300 species recorded. It's difficult to give an exact number because you have to clean the data, and then you've got things like synonyms and different names, and it gets a bit complicated, but around 3,300 species. Now, to put this in context, and I tried to find out how many species, I'm talking to the right group here, someone probably ought to tell me, but I was trying to find out how many species are known from the London area. Different numbers. So I think London LWT, London Wildlife Trust, had a number of around 12,000. I think Giggle might have had a bit higher than that. I think we used GBIF possibly as a record. Around 12,000 species. And if anyone wants to correct me, please do. But if you're thinking about 3,300 species, that's almost a quarter or 25% of London's total, which is quite remarkable for an acre. Essentially, the whole gardens is 5 acres, but most of the recording's been done in 1 acre. In the middle of central London, not that close to any green space, really. We've got Kensington Gardens and Hyde Park and various garden squares dotted around. So as a horticulturalist and as a plants person and a botanist by background, I find it really fascinating. Now, the only things that have been introduced knowingly, I should say, the frogs, toads, and newts, and so amphibians, and all the plants that have been brought in, and everything else has either hitched a ride on the plants or just made its own way here, which is just, I find utterly fascinating, because every year we find new to the garden records. So there's this fig tree skeletonizer, which is very common. If you see any fig in London, most of them have you can see the patchwork of where they've been eating on fig leaves. So that was news to the gardens on the figs that were brought in as part of Urban Nature Project. But we have another one would have been Western pine seed bug, which is, I think, the UK's largest bug. It's native to the Americas, or America, I think California, western coast of North America. And that was found on the Pinus mugo that were brought to the evolution garden. So every year we find new things to the garden. But occasionally they're new to Britain. So we've got the example of that spider wasp, but probably more relevant, actually more interesting, is actually last year during the summer, there was an Asian potter wasp. I can't remember the name. I can dig it out if anyone's interested. Seen collecting mud on the outskirts around the new ponds. And some were collected I think there's about 6 collected by the museum scientists in total. A couple flew inside the building and were collected inside. So there's definitely a population there. I haven't seen them this year, so I don't know what's happened there. But yeah, so that was a News of Britain record that is currently being written up. I don't know if that's been published yet. So lots of fascinating records. So here's some notable finds. I mean, I'm sure there's some of you have I love the excuse me, just skipped on the Dendrobana pygmea. That is a worm. I believe that's the one that was thought to be extinct in the UK. It hadn't been spotted for 30 years, and then was discovered in the wildlife garden in a log by, I believe, Emma Sherlock, which I just find, completely mind-boggling. So that's all been reported in the London Naturalist if you want to go back through your copies. And we're still publishing in the London Naturalist, although we didn't last year, and it might be next year that we can update it. So the other things that we do in the gardens, and I'll just touch on this quickly, we do volunteering. We have had apprentices as part of the Urban Nature Project. So my team, which is myself, there's Hella Wallace, who's the garden's volunteer manager and ecology lead. So she organised the volunteers, but also some of the biodiversity monitoring and recording. We do tea and tours with local community groups. We do the survey, and we look after the kind of the bed maintenance and horticulture on site. So we wear many hats. And we do a lot on site. You can see our volunteers getting stuck in on some of the planting there during the construction phase. Monitoring and recording. Here you can see the moth trap the Robinson moth trap that we run. That's going up tonight, I believe, as well. We put it out whenever the weather's nice, so we as much as we can, really. But we've also do vegetation surveys, bird surveys. Bird surveys, I should have said, have been going a very long time. And I would put the shout out, really, that if any of you want to come to the museum and do any recording, or you've got things that you're interested in, there is an iRecord activity, so NHM grounds recording. If you add that, then you can add records, and that's set up on a geographical a rectangle of the site. So actually it covers part of Exhibition Road as well. And if you make a record, then that will go into within those bounds, they will go into the activity. So please do record. If you've got, we're always interested in having different experts come in and look at different things. So if you've got a special interest, then get in touch. And yeah, please do come survey. It's one of those things that it's that classic species effort curve of the more effort you put in, the more you find. So just after I started 2019, there was a BioBlitz, and it was Duncan, who was a diptera, but I said, oh, what's this? And he said, oh, it's a bug fly, so it's Psychoptera. And then he kind of took it away and wasn't really sure. And then I identified it, but then came out and did a survey of bug flies in the garden. I think he found 11 species, one of which was News of Britain, and one of which had previously been recorded, but only on the south coast. So it was his first London record and first kind of inland record. So it's just, and there's other things, there's all sorts of groups that are probably under-recorded. So I think a lot of diptera is probably under-recorded, although we had a museum scientist, Sam Thomas, who was a very good dipterist, and he did quite a lot as well. But yeah, we're always finding new things, so please do come and do some recording. And just skip on. So here you can see just a slide of the iRecord activity and some of the other science that goes on in the gardens. So we have, most commonly recorded is blackbirds and robins and the moorhen, which is not surprising. We haven't had moorhens since the construction project, so they probably will come back if we can build the right activity for them. Right, I'm going to touch on some of the UMP science. Now, this is not my area of specialty, but I thought I'd touch on it. And that way, if you had any questions, you can always get in touch with me, and I can put in touch with the right people at the museum. But yeah, it's been a Heritage Lottery funded project. there was kind of three elements to it. There was the construction of the new gardens, which was kind of the core foundation of the project. But there was also a big science strand and a big activity strand. So the science strand was looking at developing new scientific tools and skills. And there was a big activity strand about engaging people with urban nature and the nature that surrounds them in town and cities across the UK, so that both of these were national rather than just at the museum. And there were we also have, so on the sharing, I would recommend joining the Nature Recording Hub. So you can search for these. There was some fantastic citizen science kind of projects like Nature Overheard, the survey calendar for beginners. So this is really encouraging people to start surveying the nature that surrounds them in towns and cities, so we can get better records. There were lots of ID guides that were produced by the team, and developing new scientific tools and skills. So this is, here you've got a malaise trap, and it's catching flying insects. They fly into the tent and then go up and pop out, and then fall into a jar of ethanol, or and then die. And then you can either do what you've done on this photo on the right hand side, which is you can take a leg off, sequence the leg, and then identify the rest of the insect using traditional taxonomy, or you keying things out, or you could sequence the soup and then try and get a representation of what's there. And as I have mentioned, this isn't my area of specialty, so please don't ask me to explain this, but I've put this in lastly as just a bit of a slide of what we don't know. So in the nearly close to 30 years of recording in species in the wildlife garden and now the nature discovery garden, we have recorded 56,000 records, 3,300 species. But there's so much more that we don't know. And this is just a slide of when I think it was John and Sam did some soil sampling and environmental DNA work. This is the type of thing that you can get back, which is just utterly fascinating. And none of these have been recorded. Well, some of them probably have, but very few of them have been recorded in the garden. So there's a huge amount we don't know, and that we're still learning in urban environments. And one thing, I'll go back onto the last slide actually, but when I think there was a National Geographic funded project before Urban Nature Project, and they did some soil sampling out when they still had turf out in the East Gardens and they had the ice rink there. They sampled the soil there, and interestingly enough, the soil there was incredibly diverse and wasn't represented in other areas of the site. And one of the theories that came back was that it had so much returfing done, because every time there was an event, it was returfed. And so you're bringing in all this kind of soil biodiversity from other places, which I found fascinating. And the dream for me as kind of a land manager, as a horticulturalist, a garden manager, is that one day we'll be able to use these new techniques, environmental DNA, to inform management, where we can sequence, put a malaise trap out, get an idea of what's there, then how it's responding to our management. We're a long way off that at the moment, but I think that's a dream for lots of people. Some other new scientific tools, which I haven't touched on, is acoustic monitoring. So we have a postdoctoral researcher looking at acoustic monitoring. So across the whole West Gardens, but also the Evolution Garden, we have a network of sensor sites where we can plug in different modules into data. So we can have microphones that it's a camera up on one of them. You can have weather stations and the like. So all of this data is then, plus the records from iRecord, are feeding into a data ecosystem. And we're hoping to use that for new science as well. So that's a very light touch on the science, but do reach out to the Centre for UK Nature if you're more interested in the science. I've finished there with a photo of the sheep. We haven't had the sheep back for a few years during the construction, and last year. We are hoping to have them again in future. The site has changed. It's now a very busy site, so we've got to think carefully about how we bring the sheep back. So in the meantime, we're kind of altering our management doing an early spring cut for the meadows. Yeah, so I think I'm coming up on 8 o'clock. I've spoken very quickly, but I'm going to open up for questions here because I'm happy to take any questions and jump back to slides as needed.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tom. That was just really fascinating. I like the way you started with the history of the garden.